Hello, I'm Glenda Shaw. This is public speaking for Adam Polson, my ceremonial speech number 2. A young lady was born on May 12th in 1820, and her name was Florence Nightingale. Her parents, she was born to wealthy parents whose honeymoon lasted 4 years in Italy. They lived in Florence, Italy, which they named their daughter after. She was quite a young lady. At the age of 12, her dad took over her education. He said she needed a classical education, and she learned Italian, German, French, besides her studies in English. At the age of 16, she told her parents that she felt a call of God on her life to be part of to better humanity, and so she wanted to become a nurse. So she went off to Germany, where she took her nurse's training. From there, she was sent back to one of the field hospitals in England. There was the Crimean War had broke out, and there was so many casualties. And so she took 20 nurses, 20 to 30 with her that she had helped train. And they went off to this army hospital. Now you got to understand that Florence Nightingale was born into a time when this was a doctor's world. And a man's world. Women were to get married and have children and teach children and stuff, but not to be part of the medical system. So she had a lot of things going against her. So when she arrived at this army hospital with these 20 to 30 nurses, the doctors were mad, and they were told to welcome them, but they would not allow them to do any patient care. And Florence was adamant, because here was all these women with caring hearts who wanted to help these dying soldiers. And she said, "You're not stepping foot in there until we're invited by the doctors." And as the casualties went on, and there were so many of them, that the doctors finally had to reach out and ask for her help. Now, when she went in, you're talking at a time when the supplies for the hospital just weren't there. And when she walked into this hospital, she couldn't believe the deplorable situation they were in. All the patients were dying of cholera and diphtheria. They weren't even dying from their wounds that they had sustained on the battlefield. But they all had diarrhea, and there was drains in the hospital that were full of fecal matter, and they were plugged solid. So the stench within that hospital was unreal. They had boarded up all the windows, thinking that fresh air made them sick. So her first thing, she unboarded the windows, and they started cleaning. And because Florence was born to a wealthy family, she had a lot of resources that she could pull from her family. Also, Times Magazine, like the newspaper at that time, set up a fund to help her because they believed in what she was doing. So Florence took her own money and bought linens for the hospital. She set up a kitchen, because these poor men, she knew that if they were going to survive and if they were going to make it, they needed good nutrition. So she called it the Invalid's Kitchen, and they were made proper meals. She got another building where she had hired men to put in boilers so that they could wash the linens and destroy all the germs that were on them. They had but a few chamber pots for all the patients. So they would use it for one and go to the next. And so cholera was spreading like wildfire. Back then, doctors didn't use anesthetic. So if you went in to have, if you had a wound on your leg that you sustained in the battlefield, your wound would get so bad because of the germs, and they didn't have antibiotics yet. And so the surgeons, their whole way of thinking was, let's see how quick we can saw off this limb using a saw, and sew them up as quickly as possible so they don't bleed to death. Usually within a few days, they were dead. And so during that time when Florence was there, they started using chloroform more. And at that time, it was just on a napkin that they put over their face to knock them out. One of the doctors thought, no, this is no good. Let's just let them scream like babies, because he thought that if they used this chloroform, they'd die. Well, they weren't dying from the chloroform. They were dying from the pain and the infection. And later, I'm going to pass this book around. It's got a picture of this first contraption that they used for the chloroform. It's also got a picture of a lamp. Florence was known as the lady with the lamp. And every night before she would retire and go to bed, she would take her lamp and her shawl and she would visit every patient to make sure they were all right. And she was very esteemed by everybody. When she spent about 2 years at Scutari. And there was a time in there also when I think there was I think they said 50,000 or 5,000 shirts and that was ordered by the government, by the military for these dying patients. But their paperwork wasn't in order, so they wouldn't allow them to use them. Well, Florence bought 2,500 pieces of clothing for these dying soldiers and just brought them in and did it her own way. So she gained a lot of, she was well esteemed within the military by some. There were still those who would fight against her. You got to also understand that the nurses at that time were known as women who were at the bottom of the totem pole. They were kind of the whores who had nothing else to do, that they put them to work looking after these soldiers. So Florence came in and she said, we're going to wash these sheets every day. We're going to clean this place up. And she cut down the death toll within those hospitals by 2/3. I mean, at that time, doctors would go from one patient to the next and not even wash their hands because they didn't understand germs and they couldn't see them with the microscopes yet that they had. When Florence went back to England, she was greeted by the Queen and she received an award from the Queen and $250,000. Now back then, $250,000 would have been phenomenal. But she didn't squander this for herself. She used it to improve other field hospitals. Florence Nightingale died in 1910 in London, England. She wanted a quiet and modest funeral, she told her family. They didn't want no public thing. She won her battles and is a great example to mankind. A museum sits where she had started the Florence Nightingale School of Nursing. She was known, as I said, as the lady with the lamp. We have a nursing profession today because of her. She truly is the pioneer of modern nursing, and I believe that she has encouraged me in my choice of careers as a nurse today. Thank you.
Did you pass around the book?